The bulldozers came at dawn. They destroyed 340 acres right next to her farm. Every neighbor said sell. Every expert said run. She was 22, alone, and nearly broke. Instead of leaving, she did something nobody expected. 4 years later, that same company came back, this time, begging. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. On a cold Tuesday morning, Callie Marsh found a notice stapled to her wooden fence post. She read it once, then twice, then a third time, standing in the frost with her coffee going cold in her hand. It was not a friendly letter. It was not a question or a request, or even a warning. It was a legal document from Harrove and Sons Development Company. And what it said was simple. Construction would begin on the 340 acres directly east of her farm within 60 days. A regional distribution center, roads, concrete, floodlights. The kind of project that does not ask permission before arriving. Callie was 22 years old. She had inherited this farm just 18 months earlier. She had $4,200 in her bank account, a farmhouse with a roof that leaked in 2 places, and 80 acres of some of the most quietly beautiful land in Delaware County. She folded the notice carefully. She put it in her pocket. Then she walked back inside and finished her coffee. If you have ever watched someone stay calm when everyone else is panicking, you know what it looks like. It does not look dramatic. It looks almost boring from the outside. But on the inside, something is turning slowly and with great purpose. That is what was happening in Callie Marsh. And nobody around her had any idea what she was about to do. Ruth Marsh had farmed this land for 50 years. She had grown heirloom vegetables, kept honeybees, and spent decades building something most people cannot put a price on, a seed library. It had started from a single wooden box that Ruth's own mother had carried across 3 state lines during hard times. By the time Ruth passed away quietly in her sleep at age 74, that box had grown into over 160 seed varieties, each one labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting, each one stored in small paper envelopes, dated and noted. Ruth had also kept notebooks, dozens of them, spiral-bound, filled with her slanted penmanship. She recorded rainfall. She recorded crop rotations. She recorded soil test results. She recorded things that did not fit neatly into any category, like the direction the swallows flew before a storm, or the particular smell of the soil after a long dry spell. When Ruth died, everyone expected Callie to sell the farm. Callie had grown up spending every summer there. She had learned to read weather by watching how the birds moved. She had learned the difference between a tomato grown in good soil and a tomato grown in tired soil. She had watched her grandmother work from before sunrise to after dark, not because she had to, but because she loved it with a quiet, certain love of someone who has found exactly where they belong. When Ruth died, Callie moved to the farm with 2 boxes of cloves and one clear thought: this is where I am supposed to be. Nobody believed her. They smiled politely and waited for her to change her mind. She did not change her mind. And then, 18 months later, on that cold Tuesday morning, the notice appeared on the fence post. Word travels fast in small counties. Within 2 weeks, everyone in Delaware County knew about the development. Her neighbor Dale Hutchkins came first. He leaned against her porch rail with the look of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say. He told her the trucks would run all night. He told her the floodlights would never turn off. He told her the noise would stress her hens, and the dust would ruin her garden beds. He told her she was young, that she had options, that a smart person would call a real estate agent before the land value dropped. Callie offered him coffee. He said no. He left. Then came Marcus Webb. He was the most successful agricultural broker in the county, and he sat across from Callie at her kitchen table with a printed sheet of comparable property sales and explained in careful, professional language that her land would peak in value before construction and then decline steadily once the trucks started running. He had a buyer ready. Good offer. He slid the paper across the table. Callie thanked him. She said she would think about it. She did not call him back. The hardware store owner told her that industrial noise would stop her hens from laying. The woman who ran the feed co-op told her that bees could not survive the vibrations from heavy machinery. The pastor stopped by and said, gently, that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is let go of something they love. Callie listened to all of it. She nodded at the parts that were true. She filed the rest away. She did not argue with anyone. She did not explain herself. And she did not sell. What nobody knew, what she had not told a single living person, was that she had already made her decision. She just had not told anyone what it was yet. The excavators came on a Wednesday in late March. Callie stood at the eastern fence line and watched them roll in. Massive yellow machines, moving with the slow, indifferent power of things that do not need your permission to exist. By the end of the first day, the old line of hardwood trees that had stood between the two properties for 60 years was gone. Not cut down carefully. Not salvaged. Just gone. Stumps and tire tracks and silence where there had been birdsong for as long as anyone could remember. The dust began the next morning. A fine, pale powder that settled on everything. The garden beds. The cold frames. The solar panels. The beehives. Callie washed her vegetables twice before selling them at the Saturday market. Her yields dropped 30% in the first month alone. The noise was constant. Not loud enough to be unbearable, but never ending in a way that wore on a person. Her hen's egg production dipped. 2 of her oldest hives swarmed early in the season and did not come back. Then came the rain. After a hard storm in April, the creek that ran along the northern edge of her property ran brown for 3 weeks. It was carrying sediment from the stripped, exposed earth next door. The mud was thick and reddish and wrong. Callie documented everything. Not for a lawsuit. She had already spoken to the county extension agent, who told her that what Harrove and Sons was doing was completely legal. She documented everything, because documentation was what her grandmother had taught her to do. Ruth had kept weather journals going back to 1971. So Callie kept everything too. Water samples. Photographs of the creek. Egg count records. Soil test results. Honey yield logs. A man from Harrove named Griffin Colby stopped at her gate one morning. He was compact and professional, wearing a yellow hard hat and a friendly expression that he had clearly practiced many times. He offered her a business card and a pamphlet about their neighboring property support program. Noise mitigation. Temporary fencing. Dust barriers. Callie thanked him politely. She read the pamphlet that night. She filed it in the same drawer as the original notice. She still had not told anyone her plan. The answer, when she found it, was in a notebook. Ruth had kept dozens of them on a long wooden shelf above the kitchen desk. Most of them were practical: crop rotations, soil amendments, rainfall measurements, planting calendars. But there was one Callie had set aside months ago because it seemed less useful than the others. Ruth had written 3 words on the cover in her careful hand. What the bees know. On a rainy April night when she could not sleep, Callie opened it. The notebook was part journal, part field study. Ruth had spent 8 years tracking one specific question: where did her bees go? She had marked her hives with colored paints, trained herself to follow the forager bees at dusk, and mapped their routes across a 4-mile radius. Over time, she had discovered something that surprised her. Her bees were consistently traveling to a particular spot on the land directly to the east. The land that Harrove was now excavating. But they were not going there for nectar. They were going for water. Specifically, for mineral-rich water. Most beekeepers focus on pollen and nectar. But bees also forage for water, especially mineral water, which supports colony health in ways that even the best flowering plants cannot replicate. Ruth had identified a natural underground seep on the eastern land, a place where mineral-rich groundwater bubbled up close to the surface. Her bees had been using it for years. And in the notebook, Ruth had done something more remarkable. She had traced the underground water source back to her own property. For 40 pages, in her careful slanting handwriting, she had mapped how that underground water table connected to the creek, how it influenced the soil pH in the river bottom field, how it was responsible for an unusual concentration of minerals in the western end of the farm. Magnesium, calcium, iron compounds. a particular mineral fingerprint that Ruth believed was the reason her vegetables tasted the way they did. And then, near the very end of the notebook, Ruth had written a single sentence. She had underlined it twice. If this land is ever disturbed, the seep will either be destroyed or redirected. Watch the creek. The creek will tell you what is happening underground. Callie closed the notebook. She sat very still for a long time. Then she got up, put on her raincoat, and walked outside in the dark to look at the creek. She spent 2 weeks at the county library before she said a word to anyone. She read about hydrology, the science of how water moves underground. She read about mineral-rich soil and what it does to the flavor of food grown in it. She read about a concept called terroir, a French word usually associated with wine, but increasingly used by specialty food producers and chefs to describe the idea that a place's geology could be tasted. That food grown in a specific patch of earth, from a specific combination of minerals and underground water, could not be exactly replicated anywhere else. And then she developed a theory. It was not a guess. It was based on Ruth's 8 years of data, her own water samples from the creek, and everything she had just read about how underground water moves when the land above it is disrupted. Her theory was this: the construction on the eastern land would not necessarily destroy the mineral seep. Depending on how deep the excavation went and which direction it pushed the underground water table, the seep might actually redirect. It might move westward, toward her farm. She knew it might not work. She knew the seep might simply vanish, that the creek might run dry, that she might be betting her entire livelihood on a theory she had built from her grandmother's old notebooks and 2 weeks of library research. She knew all of that. She planted her spring crops anyway. The second year nearly broke her. The distribution center was finished and operational by July. The trucks began immediately. 18-wheelers running the access road at all hours, their headlights sweeping across Callie's bedroom ceiling at 2 and 4 in the morning. The light pollution was worse than she had expected. Several of her late-season crops bolted early, confused by the artificial light that never turned off. Her bee population stabilized, but honey yields were down. The creek was still brown. The mineral seep had not moved. Not yet. Maybe not ever. In September, her truck needed a repair she could not afford. She sold the last of her hay to cover it. Her bank account at the end of that month was the lowest it had ever been. She sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night with a legal pad covered in numbers. She looked at the numbers for a long time. She understood with a cold, clear certainty that she had approximately 4 months before she would have to make a very different kind of decision. She held her phone for a long time. Marcus Webb's business card was sitting on the counter. She put the phone down. She went to the shelf and pulled out one of Ruth's older notebooks from 1989. She opened it to a section Ruth had titled Bad Years and What They Teach. Ruth had written, "The land is not being unkind when it is difficult. It is asking whether you are serious." Callie put the notebook down. She made tea. She went to bed. In the morning, she drove to the farmer's market and sold every jar of honey she had at the highest price she had ever asked. For jars sold before noon. She used the money to buy seed for the fall planting. She did not call Marcus Webb. The third year was different in ways that were hard to name. The truck traffic had not lessened, but she had planted a dense row of native shrubs along the eastern fence line. Hawthorn, elderberry, wild plum. She chose them partly for the visual screen they would eventually provide, and partly because they were productive in their own right. The berries could be sold or made into preserves. They were only knee-high that first planting season. They would not be tall enough to matter for years. But she planted them anyway because Ruth had always planted things meant for the future. That October, she noticed the creek running clearer. Not fully clear, but lighter than it had been. The silty brown color had faded to something closer to its natural shade. She tested the water. The mineral content had shifted slightly. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make headlines. But the numbers had moved, and they had moved in the direction her theory said they would. She wrote it down in her notebook. She did not tell anyone yet. By the 4th spring, the shift was unmistakable. A new seep had opened in the low ground at the western edge of her property. A small, muddy trickle, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. It smelled faintly of iron and something mineral and ancient, exactly as Ruth's notebook had described the original seep on the eastern land. Callie sent a water sample to a university extension laboratory. The results came back 2 weeks later. She sat at the kitchen table and read them 3 times. The mineral profile was remarkable. High magnesium, elevated calcium, trace selenium, and a specific combination of iron compounds that the lab noted was unusual for surface soil in this region. The technician had written a small note at the bottom of the report. Interesting profile. Unusual for the area. Would be curious to know the source. Callie smiled at that. She began growing her most sensitive heirloom varieties in that low western field. The tomatoes that came up that summer tasted like nothing she had grown before. Not louder or more intense. Just deeper. More themselves. As if the soil was allowing them to fully express something that had always been inside them, but had never had the right conditions to come through. She contacted a specialty produce broker in Nashville who distributed to high-end restaurant groups across 4 states. She shipped him a sample box with no explanation beyond the water test results and a brief note about the farm's history. He wrote back in 48 hours. He wanted to know how much she could supply. The broker placed his first order and kept it. Word travels in specialty food circles the way water travels underground, invisibly, steadily, and further than you expect. One of the people who heard about Callie's farm was a food writer named Paul Adesagna. He wrote long, serious pieces about food for national publications, the kind of pieces that treated cooking and farming as genuinely important subjects rather than lifestyle content. A source had mentioned Callie's name twice in the same week, which was enough to make him drive 4 hours north from Nashville on a Saturday morning. Callie showed him around without a sales pitch. She showed him Ruth's notebooks. She showed him the water test results. She walked him to the western seep and explained, as simply as she could, what the underground hydrology appeared to be doing and why she believed it was responsible for what was happening in her soil. Paul Adesagna took notes the entire time. When he tasted a tomato directly off the vine, he stopped walking. He spent 4 hours at the farm. Before he left, he told Callie he wanted to write a feature article. Not a puff piece. A serious, long-form piece about what terroir actually means in American vegetable farming and why it had been almost entirely ignored compared to how seriously the wine world takes it. He said her farm was one of the most compelling examples of documented food terroir he had ever personally encountered. The article ran in a national food magazine the following February. It was called The Girl Who Stayed and the Land That Remembered. Within 3 weeks of publication, Callie had more inquiries than she could answer. Restaurant groups from 4 states, specialty retailers, a documentary production company, a seed preservation nonprofit that wanted to partner with her on Ruth's seed library, a university agricultural program that wanted to study the hydrology beneath her property, journalists, chef, farmers asking how she had done it. And then, on a Thursday morning, in a plain white envelope with a corporate return address, a letter from Griffin Colby at Harrove and Sons Development. The letter was polite, professionally careful. Griffin Colby explained that Harrove and Sons was planning an expansion adjacent to the distribution center. Mixed use. A retail and hospitality component meant to attract regional tourism. They were exploring opportunities to incorporate local agricultural identity into the development's brand. He wondered if Miss Marsh might be interested in discussing a partnership. Callie read the letter at the kitchen table. She set it down. She looked out the window at the eastern fence line, where the hawthorn and elderberries she had planted for years ago were now shoulder-high, their berries just beginning to turn dark. She thought about the day she had found the notice stapled to the fence post. She thought about the yellow machines and the dust on her beehives and the months she had spent wondering, quietly, in the dark, if she was fooling herself. Then she picked up her phone and called her lawyer. Griffin Colby arrived at the farm 6 weeks later. He was the same compact, professionally friendly man she remembered from the gate, except now the hard hat was gone and the pamphlets had been replaced by a leather portfolio. Callie served coffee on the porch. She was entirely at ease. She had spent those 6 weeks preparing. She knew Harrove's timelines. She knew their projected visitor numbers for the new development. She had spoken to 2 chefs who supplied similar hospitality campuses in other states. She had a price per unit, a minimum order structure, and a list of conditions written out in plain language. The conditions were not punitive. She did not want to punish anyone. Punishment was not the point. What she wanted was 3 things. First, a permanent agricultural easement protecting her eastern fence line so that no future construction could encroach further on her property or block her access to the western seep. Second, a contractual commitment to stormwater management practices that would protect the mineral integrity of the creek that ran along her northern edge. Third, a fair, multi-year supply agreement with annual escalation provisions built in. Griffin Colby had arrived, she sensed, expecting to negotiate with someone eager. Someone relieved to be offered a lifeline. Someone who would be grateful. Instead, he sat across from a 27-year-old woman with 5 years of farm records, soil tests, water analysis reports, documented flavor profiles, a feature article in a national magazine, and a lawyer who had reviewed Herove's land use agreements before the meeting began. Negotiations took 3 sessions. She got everything she asked for. She shook Griffin Colby's hand afterward and thanked him genuinely. Not sarcastically. Genuinely. Because she had understood for years, though she had never told anyone, that the construction which had seemed like the end of everything had been the very force that redirected the underground water toward her farm. She had known that since the 4th spring. She had never said it out loud. She said it now. Griffin Colby looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him. "You knew," he said. "I had a theory," she said. "It took 4 years to prove it." Today, Marsh Farm sits between a working distribution hub and a hospitality campus that receives 40,000 visitors a year. The hawthorn and elderberry buffer along the eastern fence is now 12 feet tall. Dense enough to muffle nearly all of the truck noise. Dense enough that you have to know the distribution center is there. In summer, the elderberries hang heavy and dark purple and beautiful. The western seep is designated a protected agricultural feature in the land use agreement. It flows year-round. After a hard rain, Callie still walks out to check it. She supplies vegetables and honey to a rotating roster of restaurants across 4 states. During peak season, she employs 3 part-time workers. Ruth's seed library has grown from 160 varieties to over 200, each one grown in trial beds every year and documented in notebooks that sit alongside Ruth's originals on the shelf above the kitchen desk. Callie was offered a buyout twice in the years after the magazine article. The offers were large. Larger than anything Marcus Webb's comparison sheet had predicted. She declined both. There is a small handmade sign at the farm gate now. It reads Marsh Farm, 1974. Below Ruth's name and Callie's name, there is one line. The land remembers. Callie Marsh is 31 years old. She is not wealthy, by any standard measure. She does not own a second property or drive a new truck or take vacations. What she has is harder to put a number on. She has an 80-acre farm that produces food unlike anything grown on any neighboring acre, for reasons it took a geologist, a food writer, and a grandmother's handwritten notebooks to fully explain. She has a business built entirely on things that cannot be manufactured or replicated. Documented provenance, unusual mineral soil, heirloom seed genetics, and 50 years of careful land stewardship that she is now extending into a 3rd generation. She has something real. And she built it not by fighting what came against her, but by understanding it deeply enough to use it. There is a particular kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not hold press conferences or file injunctions. It does not post angry responses or call the local news. It shows up in notebooks kept for decades, in seeds stored in labeled envelopes, in a 22-year-old woman standing at a fence line watching machines move earth and choosing, quietly and with full knowledge of the risk, to stay. Callie never fought the development. She never needed to. She understood something that the brokers and extension agents and well-meaning neighbors had all missed. The land was not just something to protect from what was happening next door. It was something to be read, listened to, understood. Because land under pressure does not only lose. Sometimes it reveals itself. Sometimes the disruption surfaces what was always there, hidden, patient, waiting for someone paying close enough attention. The machines that came to take everything turned out to be the very force that brought it all back. Patience does not always win, but it wins more often than people who have never tried to believe. And in the rare cases when it wins completely, it creates something no amount of money, machinery, or pressure could have built from scratch. The land remembered. She remembered with it. That was enough.